Hello and welcome. Thank you for being with us. We are today here for the latest in our episode of the Nature Positive Dialogues. Special selection of live panels and interviews broadcast with We Don't Have Time in partnership with the Nature Positive Initiative here in Belém, Brazil for COP30. And in this series, we're looking at the interconnectivity between the nature crisis and the climate crisis and how we need to find joined-up solutions to solve these crises together, because that's the only way to have a prosperous, sustainable future that is creating a good way forward for both people, nature, and also the climate, a nature-positive future, that is to say. And for this panel that we've got happening now, it's called The Great Awakening, and we're really looking at the connectivity between nature and food, water, and health. And we're joining the dots between the food and health systems and the nature and climate crises, in particular how human prosperity has come at the expense of climate and nature. But by reversing nature loss, it's good news for people, well-being and health. And for this panel, we're joined by Maria Honig, who is the initiative lead for accelerating coastal community-led conservation at WWF. Welcome, Maria. And also Marco Lambertini, convener of the Nature Positive Initiative. And Marco, I'm going to turn to you first. So as audiences, I think by now know, we published in June a book called Becoming Nature Positive, Transitioning to a Safe and Just Future, really looking at the broader genesis of Nature Positive, how the movement came about, and then looking at it through the angles of science, society, business, finance, and governance. So do have a read, watch out for it. On the website, naturepositive.org/book, you can also find a free open access download there. It's available for anybody to read. Marco, you're the lead author and also the commissioning editor of that book. And in your opening chapters, you write about the Great Awakening, meaning how people are becoming increasingly aware of how we need nature in our lives for everything in order to survive and to thrive. But thinking about the angle of this particular topic, really for the provision, of course, of food, water, for maintaining health, for general well-being and sustainable prosperity. Can you give us a bit of an introduction to that, please, and elaborate on some of those topics?
Thank you, Gemma. Thank you, everybody, for joining us online. Look, let me just start by saying that we're living really special times, and today a lot of people look at present time, but also at the future we're heading towards with undeniable anxiety, undeniable confusion and uncertainty. And that's definitely understandable, because right now our future is uncertain, and that mainly due to the disruption of Earth systems that have been making this planet livable, stable, productive, providing, frankly, all we needed, and continuing to do that today for our economy, for our stability, health. So that's one way to look at it, and it is important not to forget that, because that gives us a sense of the seriousness of the situation and also the urgency to provide solutions. But there is another way to look at our times, which is much more positive. And that is that today we know. Contrary to just a few decades, and not just the scientists or the technical people in the space, but actually public opinion today is much more aware than ever before about these problems, the risks, the threats, what we call in the book the great threat of nature decline, nature collapse. Nature and climate, of course, but nature includes climate in my view, so I use the word nature in a holistic way. But also, this is the time where we are much more aware of the consequences that this climate destabilization, nature loss, is going to have on our own future, on our own well-being, and the well-being particularly of our children and the children of our children. And so that creates also, in my view, the feeling and a perception of the great opportunity, the great choice that this generation, not the next one, this generation has the chance to make. a choice of either sticking to business as usual, the nature negative economy of today that is destroying its own foundation, or embracing a nature positive future that addresses the climate challenge, the nature challenge, and secure a future. Nature conservation is not any longer a moral and ethical imperative. I feel very strongly personally about in terms of sharing the planet with all the amazing diversity of life that we have on the planet today, but it is about our own future, our own security, and this is a very different approach. So that's, for me, the positive dimension of our times that makes nature relevant to our future, and particularly, as you said in your introduction, to key challenges that we are facing today: food security, climate security, water security, health. And I think Maria can maybe start talking about the food dimensions, because she's specialist in one of those very exciting and perhaps less known dimension of food security. But
absolutely. No, thanks a lot, Marco. That gives a really good grounding in the topics that we're covering today. So, Maria, moving to you. So your work revolves largely around the injustice of the climate and nature crises and the impacts, particularly on coastal communities around the world, including humanitarian impacts. And can I ask, how do you see nature loss as negatively impacting people's lives, particularly when it comes to health and access to key resources like food and water?
Thank you very much. And yeah, you're right, Marco, excellent grounding. But here we're talking about pretty large numbers of people are affected by ocean health. I'll just start with ocean health. So if we're going to fight this climate crisis, we need to put the ocean at the center of the equation. And the stewards in those environments, coastal communities that are reaching in the 680 million people around the world, are really the pathway to change with regards to delivering ocean health. And they're at the same time on the front line. So they're the most threatened by the climate crisis. They're the most threatened by severe weather storms. They're the most threatened by degrading ecosystems. You've seen lately they've launched a report on the fact that coral reef systems are reaching a tipping point. That means we're warming our oceans way too fast, and coral reefs will decline and possibly disappear in the next 10 years. And it's those exact systems that provide us with a quarter of marine biodiversity out there, which also fulfills an important role for food security, health for coastal communities. And I'll give an example of what I mean here about food security. So blue foods, or aquatic blue foods, which make up 20% of protein needs of people, 2.3 billion people around the world, and the essential micronutrients, 6 of them specifically, which are essential to fetal growth for people living along the coast. So if we're going to annihilate these systems, we're potentially affecting the food security and nutrition of hundreds of millions of people around the world. And who is catching that blue food? We're talking about small-scale fisheries. They amount in the 110 million people around the world. They catch 40% of total blue foods out there, and they are and they're effectively the most important source of that protein for everyone else who's living around the world. So you can see everything's connected here, and if we're going to allow this this pending crisis, climate crisis of the ocean, to continue, coupled with a poverty trap, coupled with degrading ocean systems, we're going to see hundreds of millions of people's lives threatened around this. But there are solutions to it. Why? Because those exact same people are traditional stewards of those exact same ecosystems. They have a vested interest to make sure that we're going to deliver the change that's needed in all of those places. And they already have the solutions at their very fingertips. And an organization like WWF has been working alongside these people. We're talking about 320,000 rights holders around the world for decades. And now we actually are starting to see us scale up on those efforts. And it's really important that we put those people at the center of the conversations here at Climate COP, because they need the finance, they need the tech, they need the support on the ground in order to continue to do that coastal stewardship. I'm a really firm believer on that, and I think that our national governments can do the same if they put everything in it with us.
Definitely, and we're here at COP30 in Belém, and we're really calling on actors within the negotiating halls to bring about that progress that's needed. And we've been talking about the climate and nature crises being connected. Terrestrial and ocean nature is also, of course, indivisible, and often it is seen as terrestrial first. But I think those ocean aspects are really critical to bring in. And even looking at behind us here at the We Don't Have Time studio, it's mostly blue. The planet is blue, and coastal communities are at the front lines of impacts of climate change, and that's really feeling the impact most keenly in many cases. Perhaps just drilling down a little bit onto specifically the health impacts of the nature crisis and climate change. Marco, could you elaborate a bit on what how you would express that?
Yeah, so it's interesting because when we talk about human health or your well-being, it's absolutely impossible to separate it from food, blue or green, whatever you look at. Because actually, thank you, Maria, for highlighting the blue food, because this is the untold part of the blue of the food system. It's always dominated by agriculture, which of course is a major player, and of course is having a major impact. But blue food is equally important. So health, food, water access, clean air. I mean, all these things are all entirely connected and between themselves, and entirely connected to the climate and nature crisis at the same time. So as we focus on these major societal challenges, fixing climate, fixing nature is the foundation of everything else. Sounds a bit green arrogance, but actually this is what science is telling us it needs to be done. So let's talk briefly about these three dimensions. So water. Water is such an intuitive, critical dimension of our lives. And yet, we are wasting it, we are polluting it, and we are not protecting the source of nature. Citing WWF again, there was a beautiful strapline years ago when I was in WWF that said, water doesn't come from the tap, comes from nature. And that's what we often forget. Nature comes from large landscapes where the precipitations are encouraged and regulated, and the access of water is improved by releasing this incredible commodity, the incredible precious, valuable water slowly and regularly, and allowing agriculture to flourish, manufacturing to be resilient, and lives and individual lives to be healthy and secure. And so this kind of the green water dimension, the water that actually comes from nature, is so important. And by the way, a lot of this green water that comes out of the forest goes into the atmosphere and creates what scientists call, in an uncharacteristic romantic way, scientists are normally quite dry, the rivers in the sky, And so we are in the Amazon right now. Imagine that the water that the forest generates is called evapotranspiration, this difficult term, but basically it's water that trees release in the atmosphere, is 20 gigaton, 20 billion of metric tons of water. That is more than all the water that flows through the Amazon River Basin complex. So it's more than the actual water that you see in the Amazon goes from the trees straight in the atmosphere, and from the atmosphere not just falls into the Amazon itself, maintaining the rainforest, but also takes this direction of rivers in the sky and feed monsoon systems tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of kilometers away. So this is an example of how nature contributes to water access, water security, but also to critical component of the climate, which is rain precipitation, rainfall patterns. And then when it comes to actual health, that's a little bit more difficult, because nature guarantees health in many ways by providing nutrition, food, water security, all the rest, but also by keeping on check diseases. particularly bacteria and viruses that are very abundant in nature, but in pristine nature are actually kept in check by a high integrity ecosystem, so an ecosystem that actually is healthy. Typical examples, particularly in the tropics, and where we had many diseases coming from nature, from HIV to Ebola to SARS, and of course COVID itself was triggered and originated from nature, in nature. So nature is not always so benevolent. Sometimes it's quite tricky, but as systems to keep these viruses in check. When nature is degraded, when we are stressing animals that become infected, when we encroach into nature and we expose ourselves to these viruses, that is when we have pandemics. That is when we have local or global pandemics. And so, that's something to keep very clear in mind. And today, more than 60% of the emerging diseases with a potential to become a pandemics are actually of zoonotic nature, are generated in nature from animals, but particularly in situations where we put this ecosystem and animals under stress. So that's an example of, but the positive side, sorry, just the last thing. The positive side, otherwise you look, the positive side is also that nature has provided us from the very beginning, and today continue to do so, with the most important medicines that are life-saving for us, from basic things like aspirin to actually, anti-cancer, anti-tumoral compounds, and so on and so forth. So nature and health and human health are absolutely one.
Absolutely, so very closely connected, and it's highly compelling. It's very clear. The science is couldn't be stronger. But my broader question, just reflecting on that, and I'll come first to you, Maria, is how can we convince decision makers and wider audiences that of these facts, and that we need to take action and we need to change and shift towards a nature positive path that is much more sustainable? How can we do that?
Yeah, that's a really that is the question of Climate COP, right? I think that firstly we need to demonstrate that something's working, right? Proof is in the pudding. And what is really important is that the solutions that we're discussing here are actually delivering those outcomes: food security, well-being, health. And in this report that we'll be launching here, Coastal Stewardship, which is enabling nature-based solutions, or making sure that nature is delivering those positive outcomes for us through protection, through conservation, through a locally led adaptation, is bringing about those changes. And I mentioned earlier that coastal communities are at the forefront of this effort with us at WWF. The solutions that are demonstrated in the report have proven that of the 178 sites that we're working in, a quarter of those are starting to deliver food security and economic well-being outcomes, which is really important. The fact that we can actually show that to government means this needs to be done this way, and this is how we'd like to do it. The other thing is that we need to scale on those solutions. So everybody thinks let's get stuff done at the local level, but actually everyone wants to know how we're going to deliver a bang for our buck at a scale far larger than at the site level. How are we thinking about the whole ocean, and how are we going to deliver on that? And the other thing that we talk about in the report is scaling and how to do that. There are 3 ways of scaling that we should think about today, especially if we want to deliver those outcomes fast enough, with the right number of people receiving those outcomes, and conserving as much area as possible in the future. Scaling up, ensuring those solutions are embedded in national level policy. Scaling out by replicating those solutions in as many places as possible. And scaling deep, ensuring that there are networks of people that are sharing lessons, peer-to-peer exchanges, making sure that we're talking in the halls here about what works, etc. And that is the scaling framework we've adopted in WWF. It's delivered because now we're at 178 sites over 5 years. So that's pretty astronomical. And I think that's what we should be telling governments here: how to scale, what the solutions are, and demonstrate it through evidence-based.
Absolutely. No, it's optimism grounded in reality and grounded in science, but also real examples of where some of these innovations and solutions are working. And it's extremely encouraging and motivating, I think, for everybody, but making it really even more of a no-brainer that these progress and actions need to happen for sure. We've been hearing a lot here at COP30 about bioeconomy, of course, as a critical topic. This is also Nature Day today, so there's a particular lens on nature and nature restoration at COP. If we think about a particular aspect of the bioeconomy, Marco, agriculture, what are some shifts that need to happen there, and how can we seek out a more nature-positive path for agriculture?
So agriculture, it's of course something that is so important, and it's been a sector that has generated so many benefits over the last, particularly 7-8 decades. Because let's remember, there was an issue of malnutrition and a significant issue of malnutrition and starvation, and until very recently, at the beginning of the 20th century, in 1900, we had 2/3 of the population in extreme poverty, mainly defined by malnutrition and risk of starvation. And so after the Second World War, the industrialization agriculture, we need to recognize, has actually improves food security dramatically for many people. We can't deny that. It's not just good enough to point at the problems of the agricultural system of today, because that's delivered a lot for that period. Problem is that we have continued the intensification and industrialization, a chemical agricultural model, beyond the limit of what nature can actually sustain. And now we are at a point where the same system that has actually developed so much benefits until now is beginning to undermine future food security. Soil erosion, the lack of soil erosion and soil degradation, the collapse of pollinators that are important to pollinate 2/3 of our crops, the whole impact on nature due to agriculture, including deforestation, that is exacerbating climate change, droughts, floods, the reclamation of wetlands that are not allowing rivers anymore to exondate and overflow and instead flood crops and lead to crops failure. I mean, all these things, pesticides, sorry, I can go on and on forever, because, honestly, the agricultural system today is a system that makes no more sense in moving forward. Has made a lot of sense for the past, but today we are destroying the soil fertility. We are exacerbating climate change that in return impact agriculture and crops. We are poisoning food to keep animals from not eating the food, and then we eat the food ourselves. I mean, it's completely a paradox. It's become a paradox. And we are supporting with 650 billion of public subsidies, so our money, our tax money, these nature negative, climate negative practices, when we could now begin to embrace a new model, a model that still produces food, because we have learned so much in a way to produce better and more food, but without having those impacts on the system that support the food security now and in the future. And that's so obvious, but the system is so ingrained in the financial mechanism of supporting this model that it's so difficult to break through. Having said that, a point of two positive points. One, people are beginning to realize that actually we need to also look at the consumer behavior. Food waste is a tumor of our system, of food system. We are wasting so much food, and not just the companies, not just the retailers, actually ourselves in our houses, in our homes. Many of us, particularly in the rich economies. So that needs to be taken care. Reducing meat consumption, it's another key dimension. I don't eat meat, but I don't expect everybody to follow my personal choice. But reducing the use of meat is fundamental because this is the highest footprint food that we can imagine on today. And finally, the dimension of really embracing a regenerative agriculture that reduces the cost of inputs, produces more return for the farmers, and produces at the same time better food, more nutritious food, healthier food. So this is now possible through choices, behaviors, financial redirection of flows, and technology.
Yes, absolutely. And Maria, anything that you would add briefly in terms of systems change, let's say, but from a coastal perspective?
Well, take that whole point you made, Marco, and land it in the blue, if you don't mind. So, unsustainable blue economy is accelerating at a rate of knots. 100 companies have been named that are unsustainably extracting out of the ocean, while the sustainable blue economy and the principles of the sustainable blue economy
Skulle han säga det, ska jag säga det?
Possibly adopted by coastal community enterprises out there. So they could be nature positive. They could provide resilient livelihoods for people around the world. They'll provide food security. They'll strengthen gender equity, and they provide climate action in all of those places. Why are we not investing in coastal enterprises? Often the problem is scale. So we were talking about financial flows. How are we addressing financial flows to reach the scale of small-scale enterprises all around the world that are delivering those outcomes that I mentioned a little bit earlier? And this is an opportunity here at Climate COP. So they're tripling climate finance around the world, which is absolutely fantastic. But how are we ensuring that there are sustainable blue pathways in that climate finance that will reach the hundreds of millions of people that are capable of both delivering us nature positive outcomes in all of those places, but also food security, health and well-being for hundreds of millions of people around the world?
Yeah, no, definitely. And as we have a few minutes left, I just want to think a little bit more broadly. We're halfway through this critical decade and looking ahead to 2030. How can we use these key opportunities that are coming up in the coming years? So it's actually a Rio Trio year, if you like. There'll be the annual climate change conference, but we also have the biodiversity COP and the desertification COP. And before those highlights, we also have in July the second Global Nature Positive Summit taking place in Kumamoto City in Japan. So really key moments to, again, accelerate action. How can we use those? And perhaps more broadly, what needs to happen critically now in the next steps as we look towards 2030? Maria.
Well, I mentioned finance, which is going to be the biggest commitment made here at COP, likely at the next COP, biodiversity COP, and every summit hereafter. But what is important is that while we're committing ourselves in the numbers of the trillions, we're also making sure that there's equitable access and sharing of whatever financial flows happens in all of those places. I would also like it that we recognize the role, empower and strengthen coastal community stewardship all around the world. And how we do that is we've placed them in decision-making roles, make sure that they attend these conferences, they're able to speak on those outcomes that I mentioned earlier, food security, health, showing their value where it matters. And of course, I think it's important that we should be thinking about systems change. So how do we scale? And I mentioned a scaling framework earlier, which I think can be adopted by everyone.
Fully agree. Marco?
Yeah, I'm going to call out a few elephants in the room because honestly, from this conversation, I think it's pretty clear that we know the problems, we know the solutions, and we know what needs to be done and deployed. Why we are not actually moving fast enough, and even here at the COP. First, because I think privileges, vested interest in the status quo are pushing back, and they're powerful. Petrochemical, agrochemical, they don't want the transition because the transition will move those benefits away from the current system. First big elephant. The second elephant is actually us, consumers, individuals. I don't think we're still clear enough about, and this is a responsibility of our community as well. We're not making this transition personal and persuasive enough. Transitions are complicated because moving away from a system that in the last 70 years has brought so much progress to humanity, so much progress for humanity. There was an article saying there's never been a better time for humans. And although there is a lot of inequality, the majority of people on the planet are better off today than they were 100 years ago, even in the poorest region. And so, can we create a persuasive narrative that makes individuals and people want it to change, understanding the limits of the system of today and embracing the perspective, the ambition, the mission, and the new way of living, the new way of running the economy that is needed? That's, for me, is because at the end of the day, if society doesn't want to change, we won't change. And so we don't need to wait for apocalypse to hit us, because, by the way, science is telling us that that will be too late. So we need to actually take action now. But in order to take action now, we need to translate those kind of big concepts into real life, personal life. That's what Maria was saying. The local enterprises, people there are struggling with their lives to send their kids to school, etc. So, making personal in order to overcome all the obstacles that the current economic systems has created and is creating and is trying to preserve. Believing in a nature-positive future is the first step, and that needs to happen in our minds.
Definitely. Thanks so much. Well, we're nearly out of time. Thanks to Maria Honig from WWF, Marco Lambertini from the Nature Positive Initiative. Do watch out for our next episodes of the Nature Positive Dialogues. We've got more live stream panels coming and also some interviews. Do watch out for those. Marco just mentioned narrative and how we reach hearts and minds through important storytelling around nature. We have a very important announcement, which is that coming up early next year is the new film, Becoming Nature Positive. The trailer is out. You can find it on naturepositive.org/film, and we're about to watch it now. So really, it's important to reach different audiences in this way. We mentioned the book as well. It's available to download and read for free. But just coming up now, just have a little look at this trailer and be inspired.
Nature. It gives us everything we need to thrive. And it is our greatest ally in the fight against climate change. Becoming nature positive is our pathway to a safe and prosperous future.
The only way we can build a people-positive future is to secure a nature-positive one.
Yet we are destroying nature faster than at any other time in our history. And the effects on humanity are profound.
Humanity has become a weapon of mass extinction. And ultimately, we are committing suicide by proxy.
Our assault on nature threatens the foundations of our future.
We cannot continue to grow, consume, and not expect any consequences.
All the science we have today shows that we are in danger, but we have not yet lost it. The window is still open to turn back.
We are facing the greatest choice in the history of our species. Continue with business as usual and put the future of humanity at risk. Or transition our societies, our economies, and our future to a nature-positive path.
We have created these systems, and that means that we can change them.
Nature positive is not a vision. It's something that we have to do.
We are the ones who hold the pen and can write the next chapter in the history of humanity.
Can we build a better future where both nature and humanity thrive? This is the promise of a nature-positive world.